Peter Donaldson, and I'm president of the Population Council, and I'm a board member of the Global Health Council, and it's a pleased to welcome you to this important discussion of the road forward, what's next for global health. I apologize for starting a little bit late, that some of our colleagues got caught up in the security of the United Nations, and it's hard to move about Midtown, which those of us who live here drives us nuts once a year. This meeting is sponsored by the Global Health Council, by Global Health South, and by Action for Global Health. These three organizations, I think, represent the leading voices in global health. The Global Health Council is a membership alliance dedicated to saving lives and improving health for the 2 billion people who live with less than $2 a day. We're based in Washington, D.C., and our mission is to serve as the voice of the global health community and advocating the right to good health. Action for Global Health is a broad network of European NGOs advocating for the right for health for all, the Health Millennium Development Goals, and health in the post-2015 development framework. Its goal, not unlike ours, is to build support among decision makers for better health financing, for stronger health systems, and for fairer access to health care. The Global Health South is an alliance of organizations engaged in discussions about health at the country, regional, and global level. Its mission is to amplify the country level and southern voices in the international discussions about global health and about accountability for global health. I think working together, these three institutions are advancing a new framework in our field, one that recognizes the changing dynamics of the world in which we live. I think there have been lots of important changes, and you all know them as well as I do. New and more diverse pool of donors. A significant growth in understanding of the importance of non-communicable diseases as cause of death in low and middle income countries. A growing recognition of the importance of behavior in health outcomes. A very welcome, I think, increased attention on the part of recipients of aid in health and health-related issues. With the Millennium Development Goals coming to an end in less than 2 years, I think it's very important for our community to map the road forward. And our goal today is to advance that conversation about the future of global health, including how, working together, we can best influence the post-2015 development agenda and make sure that health is included in a prominent way. Our speakers will discuss how to address our changing understanding of the nature of health, the partners involved in the global health issues, and most important, or I shouldn't say most importantly, but very importantly, financing for the future. I hope we'll have new ideas and some recommendations for how global health challenges can be met. I also hope there'll be lots of exchange. We have a terrific audience here, and we're very pleased to host this. And so please hang on to your questions until the presentations are over. We hope that we'll have opportunity for an exchange of views between the audience and the presenters. I'm very pleased to have this discussion of the Population Council. Some of you may not know about the Council, so let me say just a minute on the Population Council. We conduct research to slow the spread or stop the spread of HIV, to provide more reproductive choices, and to ensure that young people have full and productive lives. And we feel like over the years there's lots of evidence that our research has led to better programs and improved policy. And in our case, especially, unlike a lot of other NGOs, much better technology. We develop new contraceptive and reproductive health technology at our laboratories at Rockefeller University and have been responsible for lots of important innovations, especially with long-acting reversible contraception. We're long-standing members of the Global Health Council and are committed to its mission, and we regularly partner with institutions and researchers across Europe and throughout the Global South. And so I'm speaking personally on behalf of my colleagues at the Council. We're very optimistic about these three groups coming together and the opportunities for very strong advocacy about global health. It's my pleasure now to introduce our keynote speaker, Marie-Paul Keeney, who is Assistant Director General for Health Systems and Innovation at the World Health Organization. Prior to joining WHO, Dr. Keeney held top research position in both the public and private sector in her home country of France. And since joining WHO in 2001, under her leadership, and WHO has played a major role in developing and licensing of new vaccines against meningitis and measles and against pandemic influenza in developing countries. So they really have made important strides, and it's a credit to her. Much of that work is a credit to her leadership. So it's an honor to have Dr. Keeney here today and a pleasure to introduce her keynote address.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues and friends, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure for me to have the opportunity to participate in this important side event to the UN General Assembly. I would first like to make a few points about the landscape for global health. I will start with the MDGs and the challenge of developing a new set of global goals. We have all seen the power of goals through the MDGs. The new goals will shape what we mean by development, and they will influence where resources and political attention will focus in the future. So the stakes are high. We also know that the circumstances in which we now debate these issues are very different from those in the late 1990s when the MDGs were being framed. We are no longer thinking in terms of one set of countries committing to do something with financial and technical support from others. Rather, we are looking for ways of framing goals so that they reflect global challenges of concerns to all of us. Now, with high stakes comes competition, of course. As an international community, we have committed ourselves to conducting an inclusive process, one that hears the voice of all. This means that we have to make sure that competition between institutions or powerful nations does not drown out the wider debate. At the same time, we know from the MDGs how important it is to have a limited number of goals that are easily communicated and readily measured. Given the many different interests we hear across all sectors, this is going to be a real challenge for all of us. For those of us involved in global health, we also see a changing agenda. There have been remarkable successes, significant decreases in the number of children that die before their 5th birthday, reductions in the number of women that die in childbirth, more than 9 million people in low-income countries on life-saving antiretrovirals, which were being described as unaffordable and inappropriate by some people when the Millennium Declaration was being drafted. The MDGs clearly have helped translate aspiration into effective action. Even with the agenda we had going into this century, there is much more to be done. In every meeting on post-2015 I have been to, the first thing I hear is that we must continue and indeed accelerate work on the current MDGs. There is still a long way to go. Reducing mortality by half or 2/3 is a milestone, but it is not the same as reducing all preventable death. That's where we should be heading. And the agenda has broadened. We have focused on children and women in childbirth. But what about the 1.8 billion adolescents that have largely been neglected until now? And what about the needs of aging populations worldwide? And critically, how can we ensure an effective response to the challenge of non-communicable diseases? I've been drowning in orange juice. If we fail in this, the result will be untold social and economic damage. $47 trillion as the last estimate. So we have to think about how to tackle this agenda. Not just the causes of ill health, but their social and economic determinants. Not just one age group, but all. Not just more effective prevention, but also financial protection from the cost of care, especially when it is costly and lifelong. As we think about a changing agenda, we have to think about the changing role of international institutions, including the World Health Organization. The last decade has seen major increases in international funding for health. This has brought enormous benefit in terms of saving lives and building systems for the future. But it has been accompanied by a proliferation of new initiatives, new funding channels, new partnerships, and in their wake, confused lines of accountability, multiple reporting systems, and, let's be clear, duplication of effort and sometimes wasted resources. We could be getting more health for the money. A more coherent approach, as is being pursued by the International Health Partnership, is badly needed. My sense is that countries are clear in what they want and what we need to see changes in the behavior of major development partners. We also know that the whole approach to development is changing. More than 3/4 of the world's absolute poor live in what is classified as middle-income countries. What are the implications for organizations like WHO? First, we have to recognize that many of these countries no longer need the kind of technical support we used to provide. They have competent professionals and technical institutions of their own to call upon. When they come to the UN, they do not need the whole cross-sectoral menu in one plan. They need to be able to choose à la carte. Let me finish by saying a few words on what a new approach to setting global health goals might look like. We are in a good place, and a consensus is beginning to emerge. People are talking increasingly about maximizing health at all stages of life. Not a guarantee for health for all, but progressive realization towards the maximum possible attainment of health and better health. That, though, is the easy part. The challenge is what comes next. Let me try and frame one or two issues for you to consider. A single overarching health goal is useful in that it requires us to be disciplined and think about priorities and how we organize ourselves. Country needs vary. The epidemiological and demographic conditions vary too. We know that we have to continue work on the current health MDGs targets, and we have to add non-communicable diseases to the mix. We have to capture the concerns for health, not in one or two age groups, but across the life course. What's more, we have to do this without coming up with a massively long list. This is the first challenge. The second challenge is about means and ends. There are those who will argue that the targets for any goal must be framed in terms of outcomes, changes to people's health. Others will say that because needs and priorities vary, it is helpful to think of a means of addressing people's health needs. In other words, to think in terms of making sure people can access all the services they need, when they need them, and to ensure that they do not suffer serious financial consequences as a result. Our position has been to say that universal health coverage is both a means and a desirable end in its own right. It clearly offers a way of integrating the wide range of issues in health, as well as being adaptable to the needs of different countries. Equity is, in a sense, hardwired into the approach, and the notion of universality provides a platform for a rights-based approach. It is about services and protection for all, without discrimination, and provides a framework by which people can hold providers accountable. One final challenge that I hope you will remember as you go into the subsequent sessions. Health is not only a contributor to and a beneficiary of sustainable development. It is also an excellent way of measuring progress. When we think about other sectors, such as sustainable energy, for example, cleaner energy has health benefits. Water and sanitation, likewise. Health, in this sense, is a suitable subject for a goal in its own right and a way of measuring success across the whole sustainable development agenda. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Jonathan Quick. I'm wearing the hat of the chair of the Global Health Council and also president of Management Sciences for Health. And let me invite our panelists to come up, and once we're seated, I'll introduce everybody. So if I could ask the four panelists to join us, that would be great. For the wrap-up? So it's really wonderful to be co-hosting this with Action for Global Health. I hope we get another chance, or you get another chance to see that video that was showing at the beginning, because they're doing a powerful job of advocacy, and also to be co-hosting with Global Health South. We've got a great group of panelists, and I would encourage you to look at the booklet here that indicates who's who. But let me introduce them, and we'll go down from here. Suri Moon, as you can see, is a board member of the Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative. She's really wearing two hats today. That's one hat. The other is as the research director and co-chair of the Forum on Global Health Governance, as part of the Harvard Global Health Institute. And next to Suri is Gary Cohen. Gary's also wearing two hats. One is as the acting CEO of GBC Health, which he can say a couple of words about. It's the Global Business Council for Health that started about more than a decade ago as the GBC for AIDS, and then AIDS, TB, and malaria, and as things have evolved, it's health. His other hat is Executive Vice President of Becton Dickinson. Next to Gary is Jeff Adlide, and Jeff joins us from the Gavi Alliance. He's the Director of Advocacy and Policy at Gavi. And at the end of the table there is Baba Gumbala, who is the regional representative from West Africa for the International HIV/AIDS Alliance, and has a lifelong history of being a rabble-rouser from the community up. So welcome. It's great to have the whole panel here. We're going to spend the next few minutes with some questions that were really provoked by Marie-Paul's very excellent overview of the current situation. And we're going to look a little bit at changing roles in delivery to improve health, at the changing financial perspective, at priority setting, and including protecting neglected and vulnerable populations. And finally, each of the panelists is going to get one wish, actually one wish for the current Millennium Development Goals, and then one wish for whatever comes next. So let's start with the question of global health delivery and roles of organizations. So and I'm going to bounce around a little bit, but Jeff, let me start with you. Gavi, the last decade was an amazing decade for global health. And as the first decade of the century, it was a great way to start. We got 3 of the 8 Millennium Development Goals, which I think most of us would love to get 3 of the 12, but probably won't happen. It helped catalyze that there was almost a millennium fever around the year 2000 that catalyzed an outbreak of megafunds to really address a variety of different issues. And one of those megafunds was Gavi, a new way of trying to improve immunization and create right incentives. So, Jeff, how do you see the role of Gavi and groups like Gavi kind of going forward?
Thanks very much, Jono. I think the really significant changes we're seeing in Gavi and in Gavi's environment in terms of vaccines and immunisation, if I can address that piece first, is that when Gavi started in the year 2000 and then through most of the last decade, I'd say, even the immunisation space, let alone the health space, was quite fractured. There were people who were concerned about measles vaccines. There were people that were concerned about running polio campaigns. There were people who said, we've got to get those traditional vaccines out there. And then there was Gavi sort of tacked on the end there, was supposed to deliver new and underused vaccines to countries. And I think what you've seen in the last period, and particularly in the last couple of years, is a coming together of all of those groups, those advocates for the different vaccines, and in particular coming together around the notion that the sustainable impact of all of those efforts is going to happen not through running polio campaigns and measles campaigns and other things, but through strengthening routine immunisation systems. So the first thing I think you've seen within the change you've seen within the immunisation space is a coalescing behind a systems-based approach, which I think is fundamental. I guess the second thing that you've seen in terms of the financing instruments that you refer to, Gavi and the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, TB and Malaria, is a massive acceleration. In the first decade of Gavi's existence, approximately 1 billion doses of vaccines were shipped to the world's poorest countries. This year alone, we've done 500 million. So you can see that that's like an acceleration like that, and the same is very true of the Global Fund. But what's most important isn't whether you're shipping the doses of vaccines out there, it's whether you're seeing the impact on the ground, of course. And the most pleasing thing is to see the data from those. Come closer, I'm sorry. It is to see the data from those few surveillance sites that we do have across, for example, Africa. I'm thinking, for example, of the Kilifi district site in eastern Kenya, where you see within a couple of years of the introduction of the Haemophilus influenza B vaccine, that disease almost completely eliminated in that district, and continuing to be at 0.000 for 4 or 5 years now. So there's absolutely no doubt about that impact. What we can't tell is what's actually happening across the whole continent, because the data just isn't there.
Okay. Let me go to Suri Boone. So in 1995, there were maybe a half a dozen public-private partnerships doing product development of different kinds. By the early 2000s, there were at least 3 dozen, and up to 80 at one point. One of the first and most creative was Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative, DNDI. What's your sense of what DNDI has done since its foundation, and how do you see organizations like that going forward in the future?
Thanks very much for the question and the kind words about DNDI. So for those of you who don't know, maybe I could just tell you a little bit about who DNDI is and what we've done over the last 10 years. We are one of the newer organizations that was founded in 2003, and our objective is to develop 11 to 13 new products by 2018. I'm happy to report we're halfway there. We've developed 6 new products, and they've all come to market in the last 6 years or so, and we target some of the most neglected and deadly diseases, including sleeping sickness, leishmaniasis, Chagas, pediatric HIV, and filariasis, as well as malaria. So a couple of the very innovative aspects of DNDI that might be of interest and offer some lessons for future efforts is one, I think, very much a partnership with disease endemic countries. So DNDI was founded by Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières, together with public research institutes in a number of countries, including Kenya, India, Malaysia, as well as the Institut Pasteur, WHO, and Brazil, I should not neglect to mention. And this was a different way of approaching public-private product development partnerships. We do, of course, also partner with the private sector and with a number of other institutions, but really at the heart of DNDI was this notion that we need to take public responsibility for ensuring R&D for neglected diseases. And I think this is a vision that continues to guide the work of DNDI today and offer some interesting lessons for the future as well, because what we're seeing is that, of course, there has been, as Marie-Paul mentioned, this huge efflorescence of many, many new initiatives over the last decade, many new public and private and civil society actors very ready and willing to contribute to global health. But sometimes that can lead to a confusion of roles. And one of the risks, in my personal opinion, is that sometimes the responsibility of the public sector to set the rules of the game, to set priorities, to establish sustainable financing systems, for example, sometimes that responsibility can get a bit lost in the fray. And one thing that DNDi has always been insistent on, and what we've a message that we've consistently pushed in our advocacy, is that governments really have responsibility for protecting and ensuring the health of their populations, and that includes investing in R&D. We have some very interesting opportunities coming up. There have been some very interesting debates at the World Health Organization over the last couple of years on exactly how can governments, in fact, come together to build a more sustainable research and development system. And that involves longer-term financing arrangements, more predictable financing arrangements, governments coming together to set priorities, et cetera, et cetera. And I think these will offer an important set of lessons for other areas of global health as well.
So still looking for new products coming out from you. Good.
We've got 6 more to go at least.
So Gary, the private sector, what role, it's evolved, and what role has the private sector played in global health, and how do you see it evolving going forward?
Well, John, I think there's been a dramatic change over the last decade of the role of the private sector. You know, I've been in BD for 30 years. I've been working on global health at BD in one form or another for maybe 20 of those 30 years, starting with work with an immunization, safe immunization with Gavi and other partners. And I can say 10 or 12 years ago, it was challenging to partner across sectors because I think that there wasn't as much openness to companies as partners, and that's changed pretty dramatically and for the better. There's still a long way to go, though. You know, and I think there's 3 ways broadly and generally the private sector can engage. There's philanthropy. We can give things away, money in kind. There's deployment of core competencies that may fall under the broad umbrella of corporate social responsibility, where we can use our knowledge to do training, to transfer skills. It's not for business return, but it's not purely giving something away. It may help the company to build its reputation. And then there's the sort of the core business models of the company, which the terminology that probably most of you have heard that's become the term of art is shared value, that companies identify ways of helping drive their business performance by addressing fundamental unmet societal needs. And that area I think we're just beginning to tap into. And if it sounds like a commercial model is not the way to go about this, let me share by analog or by analogy what's happened with mobile phones. Mobile phones are probably the most deeply penetrated new technology in developing countries, right down to the rural poor. Imagine if 5 or 6 years ago somebody said, you can do that, but it's got to be all charitable. Or even if you can do that, but it's all got to be nonprofit. The investments never would have been made to enable it to go that far. What happened there is the mobile phone companies determined how to make a successful business model that created broad access. This is an area I think we're just starting to understand, and I can tell you from personal perspective, things I'm involved in even as we speak. If you're familiar with the Grand Challenge for Saving Lives at Birth, the Grand Challenge for Development Saving Lives at Birth, it's stimulated innovations, and it's been fantastic what they've done. They have 185 innovations through their first 3 rounds, and I can tell you some of those are devices and diagnostics, things I know a little bit about, and they're really impressive. The investments to date have brought them to the point where there's a tangible concept, something you can put your hands on. You can see the potential of it. Not one has been taken to scale. Not one. We're working on the first one this week. I had hoped to announce it this week. I'm not sure all the ingredients will be in place in time. But what's needed there is to take these concepts and say, now how do we design them? Finalize the design, put the quality systems in place, design a manufacturing process, put them at high scale, drive out costs, and put them through a global distribution system. That's what needs to be done. If that's done properly, in my opinion, I'll talk maybe on the second question about, or maybe the third, maternal and newborn health. I think newborn mortality is now 40% of child mortality. It's grown, it's disproportionately not benefited from the interventions the way under 5 mortality have, because there's a whole range of innovation that's needed to provide the type of services to newborns that are available here that aren't at all available in developing countries. That requires innovation at scale, low cost, high access, and it requires companies to have innovative business models to be able to accomplish that. So I think we're just starting to tap into that. It all has to be done around common goals. I'm not as much of an idealist to say that companies that really don't care about these things are going to start doing them. There's a lot of companies that do care. And by the way, Peter Singer of Grand Challenges Canada said the bottom of the pyramid today is the future of the diamond of the future. Is the middle of the diamond for the future. We've seen that happen in places like China and India. It's happening now in Indonesia and Vietnam. The people who did not have funds before with growing prosperity do. The smart companies are realizing that that's their future.
Great, good. So, Baba, coming down to community-based advocacy and service delivery groups, you've been at this for several decades, and the explosion of AIDS funding really grew thousands of civil society organizations. What do you see as the future, and where's the contribution to how does the contribution to saving lives and improving health evolve?
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. Before going direct to your question, I just want to make some remark on the remarkable and vibrant opening remark from Dr. Paul. I think it was really good, and I need to make some remark on that before going direct to my point. And I want to talk a little bit about global health action for global health that I am representing here. I'm the Africa Regional Representative of International HIV Alliance, and International HIV Alliance is member of the Action Global Health since its creation in 2006. For those who don't know really Action for Global Health, it is a network of 15 NGOs concerned about health and based in Brussels, France, Germany, Netherlands, UK. And they have another the same platform in UK, in United States, as the president explained it already. It's called the Global Council. Coming back now to the opening remark, I want to touch base in two things. The first thing is governance and leadership. I think it was really clear, and I participate in all the consultation process in Africa, at country level and at a global level. The main concern of all the consultation that we can really take from the consultation is the real concern about governance, leadership, and accountability. We think that from our perspective that if even for the current Millennium Development Goal and for the post-MDG, if you don't have a very strong leadership, if you don't have a very strong accountability mechanism and a good governance, we will not meet our goal. I think it is really important to have them as a foundation of what we are discussing right now, the post-MDG goal. It is really crucial. The consultation was also really participative compared to the last MDG process, but it is also, we have lots of room to come improvement in terms of implication of civil society organization. Because from my Africa experience, I was the only one who was participating as a civil society, health civil society representative in the whole Africa consultation. It is something that I want to come highlight in this key panel, saying that our contribution as a civil society organization is really fundamental if you want to make sure that community perspective and community priority are taken in consideration in any process that we are talking about.
So, Baba, let me get you to take us to the second question we were going to focus on, which is financing. In April 2001, the heads of state for the African Union met in Abuja, and they committed to put 15% of their public budgets into health. When they looked at it 10 years down the line, about 6 of them met that goal. In terms of the role of civil society, particularly as financing, it's a little bit of a paradox because basically when the North started melting the global economy in 2008, they plateaued out. But during the next 3 years, from 2008 to 2011, there were countries in Africa that were growing, at least a half a dozen countries growing more than 5% a year. So there's been a shift in where the resources are, and it's quite variable in developing countries, but a number are seeing economic growth. So how are you holding the governments accountable for putting into health what they committed to?
Yeah, I think it is our daily advocacy and policy work, holding our government accountable for respecting what we call the Abuja commitment to spend 50% of the general budget to health. It is a very big issue. Some countries are roughly to reach this commitment, but lots of African countries are left really behind of that. And I think that it is really important for Africa country to meet this key commitment, because as civil society or organization, we can't understand and we can't accept that the health of our community are on the end of other people or all the partner. But this doesn't mean that we can excuse the role and the responsibility of the developing world, because in the environment of global solidarity, it is normal that even the African country need to contribute for the health of their community, but also the developing country need to meet their key commitment. And it is why we are a little bit worried about the new tendency of lots of donors and lots of partners to really withdraw their support from middle income country. It is now a tendency, and it can have a very bad impact on the health at the community level, on the health of our community. Because if I can bring just one figure, even if you are a middle developing country, we have a lot of them now in Africa. My country, Senegal, is now classified as a middle income country. But we know that maybe 2/3 of the most poor people in the world are in middle African country. We know that the most important part of people living with HIV/AIDS are in middle income country.
Okay, let's stay on that point for a minute.
Yeah.
So we've got this, again, another paradox that we're low-income countries are now middle-income countries, and donor countries who don't have as much to give anymore are looking for ways to sort of, where's the best investment there? And one of the comments that Marie-Paul made in the opening is that the post-MDGs are going to influence where the money will go, and the stakes are very high. So Jeff, in terms of Gavi and middle-income countries, and Marie-Paul, if you want to weigh in on this, what is the dynamic here about, because as we've said, if the goal is poverty and eliminating poverty, and most of the poor people in middle-income countries, but donor countries don't want to give to middle-income countries, how do you square the circle there?
Yeah, well, absolutely fundamental question about whether we're talking about poor people or poor countries, and the paradigm thus far has been poor countries, and clearly the dynamics of poverty are shifting. I think in terms of financing, it's something that's right at the centre of Gavi, because essentially we're set up as a financing instrument. I mean, something like $8 billion so far committed to countries just in 12 or 13 years. And there's two things that come to mind that I think are worth thinking about. One is that notion about innovative financing. I don't know how much more innovation there can be. Everyone is looking for the next form of innovative financing. I think it strikes me as just a very difficult thing to explain to my children. How come we set out in Gavi to tap the capital markets through this thing called IFM, the International Finance Facility for Immunisation, proved it can be done, raised $4.5 billion by selling vaccine bonds, which logically you have to pay back those bonds. Investors buy them, they get paid back at a profit, but it brings the money forward to enable a preventative intervention like immunisation to be spread now, saving people's health, improving their livelihoods, and therefore, it just makes absolute sense. This was Gordon Brown's big idea how many years ago, and he couldn't sell it to the community. So he said, let's just, okay, if we can't sell this as an international finance facility for development, let's try it out in one area. So we tried it out in immunisation, and guess what? It worked. Now what? Where is this sort of moral failure to learn lessons, learn the positives? This thing worked. How can we as a community now say, well, where else can we apply this? It may not apply everywhere. It may not work everywhere. The economists who studied it and found the 18% return on this particular investment vehicle, IFM, found it to be true because we were dealing with a preventative investment. So it may not work for all things in development, but it certainly works on the preventative side, and there's lots to be prevented out there. Okay. So why don't we take it forward? The second thing I'd say is domestic financing. Absolutely critical, really important. And how do we find ways to incentivise that domestic financing and not displace it? We've come up with one small way, which seems to be starting to work. We call it co-financing, where even the poorest countries, Somalia introduced the first vaccine they have introduced in that country for 30 years a few months ago. They are paying 20 cents a dose for that vaccine. The incentive being to make an evidence-based decision. Is this a worthwhile investment in my country? Because otherwise, if we're just saying, here, do you want this? Talk to an immunisation program manager, yes please, I'll have a new vaccine. Talk to the health department, yes, I'll have a new vaccine. Talk to the finance ministry and they say, well, prove it.
Okay. Marie-Paul, you raised the first question about financing. You want to get an oar in here?
Yes, thanks a lot, Jono. Yes, of course, we lots of poor people live in middle-income country, but we need also to move this idea that aid is the only way forward, and to move towards a society where we see beyond aid coming there. So there will be a need still to continue development partner providing assistance, but what we need now is also more health for the same money. And this goes with further development of transparency, of accountability, of helping also of countries make choices in what is worthwhile for them. One of the requests that we have had from many countries as we discuss universal health coverage is how can we help them put together technologies like health technology assessment. Lots of things are cost effective, but what is more cost effective than the rest? What can you afford? So I think new finances are needed. There is a need to sustain financing also, but we need also to change the mindset of how we want to use this money to do better with what is available.
So one other question on financing, at least, and maybe, Suri, if you could maybe be a little bit brief. So in 1973, the World Bank published the Investing in Health, and Lancet has decided let's do a 20-year review on that, and they've got a commission going that has the modest goal of proposing an integrated global health investment plan for the period 2013 to 2035. Should we be, and that's going to come out in December. Is there any way to get inputs into that you know of, and should we be watching that, or will that solve any of the problems that Baba and Jeff have raised?
I'm sure there are ways to give input into the process, and I'm happy to speak with people who are interested in doing that. My home institute, the Harvard Global Health Institute, is one of the sponsoring organizations. But if I could just say a couple of words on financing before we move on from that topic. I think a couple interesting issues came up on the panel that merit a couple of further comments. One is I think the IFFIM of Gavi is, of course, a very interesting and innovative new proposal, but the way that most countries, in fact, finance healthcare, finance public goods is through taxation. And if we had a government at the global level, we would probably have more global taxes than we do today. UNITAID is, of course, the initiative that was started based on a tax on airplane tickets, has been another very interesting and innovative form of financing. The scale remains relatively small today, but I think it sets a precedent that, in fact, we can explore other types of transnational or global taxes. There has been increasing civil society support for a financial transaction tax, which is estimated to raise perhaps $400 billion a year, depending on, of course, how many countries and the rates and that sort of thing. Just to give you a sense of what that would mean, total health spending in low and middle income countries right now is at about $500 billion per year. 95% of that comes from the countries themselves. It's not coming from donor governments. So we see that governments are absolutely the primary source of financing of health in their own countries, that there's a possibility for governments to agree, for example, on a financial transaction tax. And if they put those rules in place, then we could address some of the financing constraints that we face. Certainly not all of them, but some of them. And just one last comment on the issue of middle-income countries, which I think is one that everybody is really wrestling with. Huge inequality, huge needs, but growing economies. If we think about, again, this notion of government responsibility in middle-income countries, it also raises the question of how do we make sure that the products, the technologies, the services that governments need to provide to their own populations are affordable for middle-income countries. And I think that's a big weakness in many of the initiatives that we see today, is that so much attention has been put on the low-income countries, and this makes perfect sense. This is where a lot of the resource transfers need to go. But at the same time, there's been, I think, inadequate attention to ensuring that middle-income countries can access prices for example, drugs and vaccines that they can sustain over the longer term. Your question on the global investment plan. If we do want to achieve very ambitious new targets for global health in the next 15 to 20 to 30 years, and we need a global investment plan, that plan is going to need to be funded. And while increases in development assistance for health have been very impressive, I think everyone in the room is aware of that, we still need to keep in mind what a small percentage they make up of total spending. And governments are really going to need to get behind that global investment plan.
Jonathan, can I add
Yeah.
one point about financing?
Mhm.
I think the other way that we can really foster the financing of health in developing country is to push private sector to fulfill their societal responsibility. If you go in lots of Africa countries, the mining company, the big multinational, they are earning a lot of money, but they don't really invest in terms of health. We don't see the return of what they are getting from the country. I think it is good to have a very good partnership with the private sector. We welcome this partnership, but we need also to know that private sector need to fulfill their societal responsibility in developing a country. It is another way also to find the financial gap, to fill the financial gap.
So Gary, you want to put on your GBC health hat and make any comments on that?
I can, and maybe we use that as a segue into your next question as well, because I think I'm going to create a linkage here. Well, first, I'm going to sound like I'm either too far to the left or too far to the right, depending on the issue. You can make up your own mind. But I think that, I know that the disparity between rich and poor is now, that gap is wider now than it's ever been in many countries, including this country. And I think it's unconscionable. And I'm not saying that because I'm radically in favor of some sort of enforced redistribution of wealth, but it's a danger sign. Because vulnerable and I think the humanity of a country can be defined by how it treats its vulnerable populations and how it treats its minorities. And vulnerable populations are increasingly, now turning back to global health, truly at the brunt end of the unfinished business, and there's a lot of unfinished business in global health. The impact on women, the impact on children, the impact on newborns, and there's nothing more vulnerable than a newborn infant. When there was a big problem with mother-to-child transmission, which there still is, but fortunately that's an area where a lot of progress has been made, the very notion that the HIV/AIDS pandemic found its way to a newborn tells you that the world's response was insufficient because it's found its way to the most innocent, the most vulnerable. Likewise today, the fact that newborns, more often than not, if they're born at risk, will not survive. And the numbers, the 40% of child mortality it's represented by newborn doesn't even include stillborns. If you include stillborns, the number almost doubles. I think it's 2.8 million pre-28 days newborn mortality and 2.6 million stillborns, if my numbers are correct. So to tie this back to financing, I think that there are steps that need to be taken on the efficiency of spending. When the HIV/AIDS pandemic was first, the financing for HIV/AIDS first started in the early 2000s, we were dealing with the way the U.S. called it an emergency response. I've always told people, if your house is on fire, that's not the time you go and install fire alarms. The house is already on fire. You get the hoses, you may waste some water. But we're now many years into this, and we know that antiretroviral treatment can be extended probably by double if we look at the efficiency of how the funds are being deployed. And with more reliance on local health systems to accomplish that would be one point I would make. I think turning back to vulnerable populations, I'll make this brief, but I think about global health systemically in this manner. You start by treating symptoms. So people are dying from HIV/AIDS, you get them antiretrovirals, you save their lives. Then at some point you realize, well, you can't even reach all the people because you don't have supply chain, you don't have warehouses, you don't have trained health workers, you don't have an adequate health system. So then you work your way back to systems. Health system strengthening is an example. Ultimately, you got to work way back once more to societies. And I've intentionally said 3 S's here. The underpinnings of continued disease spread and public health issues are societal. And we need to start investing in the behavioral sciences to affect the social norms that allow diseases to continue to be spread. Now, I know that sounds very ethereal. I can get very, very specific with putting on another hat, an initiative I founded with many other important partners 4 years ago to address sexual violence against girls, because I saw that was not only feeding the HIV/AIDS pandemic, particularly in high prevalence countries where 3 out of 4 infected youth were female relative to male, which tells you they weren't getting it from male youth, but also it was disproportionately feeding maternal mortality, because a girl who experiences sexual violence is 3 times more likely to become, 30% of girls who experience sexual violence in Kenya became pregnant as a result. What happens when a girl becomes pregnant? Well, she's 15 or under, and over half of incidents of sexual violence affect girls under 16. So if she's in that age group, 5 times more likely to die in childbirth. So it's feeding maternal mortality. What happens if she gives birth? Is that baby going to be born into a good condition with a teenage mother? No, that'll be a baby born into poverty, likely to suffer the health consequences, which impacts MDG4. Chronic diseases, dropping out of school. There's a long list of things that are embedded in this linchpin of sexual violence. We have to start investing in those areas because we've spent time now treating the symptomatic outcomes. By the way, we have to continue that. I'm not suggesting we pull back on that, but now we got to start to deal with the societal underpinnings, which include vulnerable populations. I think we're just starting there. And we need also some new science. We need behavioral science to complement infectious disease expertise, which is primarily what exists within the global health space.
So taking that back to the question, the sort of tension that Marie-Paul talked about with the means and ends. And in the whole movement around universal health coverage, there have been some recurrent anxieties that different groups have raised. One is particularly the reproductive health and sexual rights community. The AIDS community sometimes been concerned that priority would get lost. And do you include all the health outcome measures,